They say some girls are born with charm and some with chores. Maren Calloway had both hands full of the second. Folks in Millhaven didn't look at her twice unless it was to pity her or steer their children out of the way. One clean blue morning, her own father, flesh of her flesh, looked her dead in the face and said, "You're too ugly to marry. No decent man would want you." That should have ended it. But across the street, leaning against the sun-bleached frame of Morris's Mercantile, stood a tall, broad, quiet man who heard every word. He tipped his hat, met her eyes, and said in a drawl as easy as worn leather, "Funny, because I was just thinking, you look edible. Before we ride back into the dust and light of Millhaven, let me ask you something honest. Do you believe everyone is beautiful? I've seen people of every shape, shade, and size. The faces blur with time. What doesn't blur is the way someone shows up when nobody else does, or how they carry pain without curdling into bitterness. That kind of beauty lasts. Tell me what kind of beauty matters most to you. And if this story touches something true, go on and subscribe. We've got more that'll sit with you long after the last line." The morning sun came up like a bell ringing over Millhaven, Kansas, laying gold across the dusty main street. It was September of 1884, a year of hungry locust gossip and a good wheat yield, and the town was wound tight with the twin excitements that visited twice a year, harvest and weddings. For the Calloways, both had arrived on the same porch. Maren, 26, stood at the kitchen window of their tidy two-story on Elm Avenue. Her younger sister, Lila, twirled in the yard in her white wedding dress like a wind-blown blossom. At 22, Lila had honey-gold curls that caught the light like spun thread, cornflower blue eyes with mischief tucked in, and a laugh that could unknot a stiff crowd of men. Maren's reflection barely moved in the window pane. Mousy brown hair pinned in a severe bun, gray eyes with the faded look of drought-time fields, skin browned and roughened by seasons of lifting, hauling, tallying, scrubbing. Her hands, which could braid rope, measure grain, and turn flour into 20 loaves by noon, were a ledger of every sacrifice she'd made for her father's failing business and her family's comfort. "Maren?" Edwin Calloway's voice cracked out from the front porch. "Get out here and fix the mess your sister made with those ribbons." She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped out onto the porch. Ribbons and wildflowers had come loose and blown across the boards. Lila stood there with a tremulous lower lip near tears. "They won't stay," she said, helpless as spun sugar. Maren knelt. She worked the floral garland into the railing, threading ribbon through slats, her fingers sure and quick. She'd done this 100 times for church socials, harvest suppers, and other people's bright moments, always her hands on the work, never her name on the lips that praised it. Edwin watched like a shopkeeper counting bolts of cloth. He was 53 and had grown hard as the ground that shaped him. The gray beard and deep wrinkles were less of a face and more of a stamp. "At least one of my daughters knows how to work," he said. Then he turned that cold born-of-debt look on Maren. "Though I suppose that's all she's good for." Lila twisted her engagement ring, Henry Carmichael's ring. The Carmichaels owned more cattle and more grass than any 3 families in the county. Their wedding would secure futures. It would also throw into sharp relief everything Maren didn't have and had stopped expecting. "It's not," Lila began. "Not true?" Edwin's voice rose, dotting the air with sharpness. Neighbors lowered their voices to hear. "Look at her, Lila. She's 26. Most women her age have been married a decade with little ones tugging their skirts. Widow Harrison told me Sunday it's a pity about my eldest. Said some girls aren't meant for marriage, meant for service, for caretaking, for being useful in ways that don't require a man to want them." He stepped close enough that his shadow fell across Maren's hands. "You're too ugly to marry, Maren. No decent man would want you. Accept it and set yourself to being useful." It was like he'd reached in and squeezed the breath out of her ribs. Maren straightened, smoothing her worn gray dress with hands that suddenly couldn't find stillness. She felt eyes from behind curtains, from porch swings, from shop doorways. By sundown, the whole town would carry the story the way people carry a fresh secret, carefully and constantly. Across the street, the man who had been leaning against the Mercantile frame stood from his slouch. He had the stillness of a large animal, considering whether to move. He tipped his hat a breath. then started across the street with the unhurried gait of someone who doesn't ask permission to occupy space. "Can I help you?" Edwin snapped, already oiled up with Carmichael politeness. The man stopped at the edge of the yard, close enough that Maren could see a dark shadow along his jaw and catch the clean scents of saddle soap, leather, and dust. "Name's Rowan Carmichael," he said, touching the brim of his hat toward Maren. "Cousin to Henry. Rode up from Texas for the wedding." The Carmichael name traveled on its own wind. Even Edwin arranged his face quickly. "Mr. Carmichael, we're honored." Rowan didn't look away from Maren. The brim of his hat shifted and lifted the shade from his face. His eyes were the green of wind-bent prairie, his jaw was a line a sculptor would trust, and his mouth seemed built for trouble and comfort in equal measure. "Funny thing," he said slowly, "I was standing over there minding my own business when I heard your conversation, and I couldn't help but think." He paused, the air seeming to lean toward him. "I was thinking, you look edible." The town's breath came out in a gasp. Lila's hand flew to her chest. Mrs. Patterson dropped her basket, and apples went rolling like marbles. Edwin's mouth opened and closed, caught on a hook. Rowan's gaze never swerved. For the first time in her life, Maren felt what it was to be fully seen. Not inspected, not measured, not pitied. Seen. "What did you say to my daughter?" Edwin choked out. "I said she looks edible," Rowan answered, steady as a beam. "Like something a man could feast on all his life and never get his fill." He touched his hat again. "I'd like permission to call on her, Mr. Calloway. Proper, with your blessing." Silence pressed so tight that you could hear the hard gallop of Maren's heart. It had to be a joke. Men like him didn't speak that way to women like her. But everything about him, his stance, his voice, the sparks in his eyes rang true. She's not," Edwin started. "She's perfect," Rowan said, mild and final. "And I intend to prove it to her if she'll let me." Maren's voice traveled up out of the same place that hurt. "Yes," she said. The word surprised her with its steadiness. She spent the afternoon at the stove, kneading, stirring, chopping, tasting, moving through the kitchen at the speed of thought, trying to work a tremor out of her bones. Cooking had always been the place she could pass through pain and come out with something warm and worth offering. But even there, a pair of green eyes and a soft, drawled word, edible, broke through like sunlight in a shuttered room. Lila slipped in, veil pushed back, the edge of worry smoothing her usual brightness. "What father said was cruel," she said bluntly. "He wasn't wrong," Maren said, wiping flour from her fingers with more attention than a towel deserves. "He was absolutely wrong," Lila insisted with the stubbornness people mistook for sweetness. "You're not ugly. You're quiet. You're yourself. That counts." 26 years of evidence says it counts less than we wish, Maren said, gentler than her words. Lila took a breath, then spoke like she'd practiced. "When you looked at him, Rowan, that wasn't the face of someone resigned, it was hope." Before Maren could answer, the door opened. Edwin came in with Henry behind him, uncomfortable in a Sunday suit, and Rowan stepped last, filling the doorway. "Maren," Edwin said, jaw tight, "Mr. Carmichael has something to say." Rowan took off his hat and held it in both hands like it was a promise. "Miss Calloway, I hope you'll forgive my boldness this morning. I meant what I said. I'd like to court you properly." Edwin's scowl deepened, pushing past manners. "Mr. Carmichael, surely you can see this is an error. Maren isn't the sort of woman men like you, men with success, wealth, choices pursue." Rowan's voice stayed level, but heat flickered in his eyes. "You're right, I have choices. I've had plenty. Pretty, rich, charming, but I've never had a woman look at me like she could see my soul. I've never felt worth more than the number in my ledger and the fences I've paid for, and I have never seen anything as beautiful as your daughter kneeling on that porch, making the world better with her hands while everyone took it for granted." It quieted the room the way a late snow settles. Even the wall clock seemed to forget to tick. "So yes, I have choices." He kept his eyes on Maren, not her father. "And I'm choosing her, if she'll have me." Maren pressed her palm to the table to steady her body while her beliefs tilted. He read the panic in her breath and softened. "You don't have to answer now," he said. "Think on it. But I hope you'll let me escort you to the harvest dance tomorrow night, after the wedding." "Absolutely not," Edwin said, a flint strike in his voice. "Maren has responsibilities, duties." "To what?" Rowan cut in, not rudely, but like he couldn't bear another inch of that logic. To spend her life invisible, so other people don't have to reconsider themselves? Henry, to his credit, cleared his throat. Perhaps we let the ladies decide. Lila, already standing straighter, said, I think it's a wonderful idea. My sister deserves to dance at least once in her life. All eyes turned. If a life could hinge on a single breath, this was hers. Maren thought of years spent standing in kitchens and behind pillars and by doorways. She looked at Rowan, whose eyes held assurance like water holds sky. Yes, she said. I'd like that very much. The wedding the next day was as lovely as a picture card. Lila glowed in silk, Henry softened into someone tender, and the church's raw wood and clear windows contained a kind of homemade holiness. If Maren had wanted to, she could have written the recipe for the supper with her eyes closed. People cut their ham thick and their cake thin and moved in currents that pushed whispers ahead of them like wind-blown thistle. That Carmichael cousin took a shine to the older one. Plain girls need charity too. He asked to court her in public. Mrs. Patterson saw. Charity, pity, mistake. Words that had once built a wall in her chest now pinged off something newer. She sliced cake, poured coffee, refilled biscuits. A shadow fell across the table. She looked up. Miss Calloway. Rowan's voice was formal in its softness. He'd changed into black that fit like an argument he already knew he would win. You look lovely today. She looked down at the blue calico she'd sewn and the simple collar she'd tacked down with careful hands, and she lifted her head. Thank you, she said. I've got a surprise in mind for tomorrow, before the dance, he said, mouth curving. Will you trust me? Yes, she said. It was easier than breathing. Sunday came in clear and cool. At 2 o'clock, hoofbeats sounded. Rowan rode up on a bay that moved like a thought, leading a sweet-faced chestnut mare. Where we're headed won't favor a wagon, he said, offering his hands to her waist and lifting her into a side saddle like she weighed less than the air around them. For a heartbeat, they were eye level. She saw the little gold flecks that lived near his pupils. He smelled like the kind of soap you buy at a general store when you still believe your future will be clean. They rode out of town and onto a path between wheat and tall bluestem. The prairie opened, then opened again. They moved inside a wide, unjudging quiet. Property I'm thinking of buying, he said. I'd value your opinion. I don't know land values, she said. Not asking prices. I want to know if it feels like a place a person could build a life. They rode in the kind of silence that knits people. The grass hissed in the wind. A hawk wrote a circle in the sky the way a child idly draws on a slate. Tell me about Texas, she said. It's bigger than your mind wants to hold at first, he said, voice turning reflective. Sky so wide it'll take your breath clean away. Lonelier than Kansas, too. A man can ride a week and wave to one rider in 3 cottonwoods. My people have land in the hill country, but I've always been a roamer. Thought maybe I'd find something different up here. They reached a weathered fence post and he reined in. Beyond, the land rolled out gentle and green gold. A creek made a line of silver and cottonwoods whispered along its banks. An empty farmhouse sat at a respectful distance, small but sturdy, like a person you'd trust with money. This is it, he said, swinging down and offering his hand to her. 300 acres, good water, soil that doesn't complain if you work it. What would you do with it? She asked. Cattle. Some horses, he said. He walked a few steps and then came back as if he'd left something of value near her. But I'm more interested in what you'd see here. Me? You, he said simply. If this were your land, what would you make of it? Maren looked around and let herself in without apology. A proper garden, she began. Not just vegetables, flowers too. Roses near the porch, lilacs near the bedroom windows, a chicken coop near the creek. Close enough to carry water without cussing, far enough that you don't smell it every time you bake. The house needs paint. I'd add a bigger kitchen. Any woman doing real work needs counter and cool corners and a root cellar for winter. Replace the gate so it doesn't gripe every time you open it. A porch swing for evenings, and you'll want shade trees. This sun will peel you if you let it. When she stopped, she realized he had been watching her like a man listening to the first rain hit after a long thirst. Heat started up her neck. She began to apologize. Don't, he said, a half step closer. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Hoofbeats approached along the fence line. A middle-aged man in a good coat and better hat swung down. "Marcus Webb," Rowan said. "Land agent. Asked him to meet us." Webb tipped his hat to Maren, a flicker of surprise in the movement. "Pleasure, Miss Calloway. Mr. Carmichael's asked the right questions. Don't often see a lady out looking over raw land unless folks are serious." Rowan didn't blink. "I value her opinion." Webb listened as Maren spoke about the soil and water and windbreaks and kitchens that fit a life. He asked a few questions, nodding with the kind of approval that doesn't condescend. "Sound thinking," he said finally. "A place needs a woman's hand on it to turn from land into home. You two make a strong team." The word set some ringing in her chest that took time to settle. 2 days ago, she believed she belonged to the corners of rooms. Now a land agent spoke of her as part of a pair that made something better together. Webb left with a promise to have papers ready by week's end. Rowan and Maren stood near the empty gate while the light shifted toward afternoon. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For asking," she said. "For making room for my thoughts like they're worth the space they take up." He looked like he wanted to take her face in his hands, but he only said, "They are." The ride back felt short. At her gate, he helped her down, and the warmth of his hands at her waist lingered a heartbeat too long. "May I call on you again tomorrow evening?" "Yes," she said, and she didn't have to raise her voice to make sure he heard the certainty. Inside, Edwin stood at the window like he'd never left it. She braced without realizing it. "Webb stopped by," he said, not looking away. "Said you impressed him. Said any man'd be lucky to have a practical wife." It wasn't an apology, but something inside her that had been frozen so long she'd stopped feeling its edges cracked. The next 3 weeks threaded themselves with routine and novelty. There were afternoon rides and evenings on the porch steps, boots scuffing wood, voices turning over everything from cattle rotations to lemon meringue's temper. Rowan included her in decisions, which still felt like stepping into a warm room after miles in sleet. The town kept watching. Patterson still pursed her mouth into a prickle. Mrs. Whitmore still shook her head like dislodging rain. But the sting softened. What mattered was that Rowan looked at her like a man who knows where he's going and is glad the road brought him past this particular door. On a morning crisp enough to sting the lungs, Rowan arrived in his best suit with the air of a man set on a particular task. "Is your father home?" he asked. She led him to the study where Edwin kept ledgers that looked like a record of arguments lost. Rowan set his hat on his knee. "Mr. Calloway, I'd like your permission to marry your daughter." "You're serious?" Edwin asked, eyes flicking between the man and the notion. "Completely," Rowan said. "I've purchased the Morris property. The house will be ready by Christmas. Come spring I'll expand the herd. I can provide. She will not want for anything." Maren felt old fear rise like fog. She cleared it with her own voice. "Father, that question is for me." She turned to Rowan. "Are you asking me to marry you?" He went to one knee like gravity had a different set of rules for him. Taking her hand between his, he said, voice thickened, "Maren Calloway, you are the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman I've known. You see beauty where others see work. You find answers where others see problems. You've made me believe in home." He drew a small velvet box from his coat and opened it. The diamond was modest but bright, the band a band of promise. "Will you be my wife?" "Yes," she said, and the word traveled through her whole body like warmth. He slid the ring on, and for a beat the world felt exactly sized. Edwin cleared his throat, stiff in the doorway of his own change. "Rowan, you have my blessing." He turned to Maren, a man trying to put down something he'd carried too long. "And daughter, I owe you an apology. I was wrong about your worth and wrong about your future. You'll make a fine wife, better than I deserved as a father." December 15th dawned with frost on the window panes like lace and a sky the color of tin and hope. The dress Layla had pressed upon her, ivory silk and lace, lay on the bed like an invitation. When she put it on, the mirror offered back a version of herself that startled and satisfied her. Her hair, freed from the severe bun, fell in soft waves with orange blossoms tucked just so. The biggest change was under her skin. Doubt replaced by something quieter and stronger. The church filled with everyone who had ever said hello or thought a thought about the Calloways. Edwin's arm was stiff under her hand but not cold. At the front, Rowan stood in black and certainty. His face when he saw her, there are no recipes for that. When it came time for vows, he set aside the book. "Maren," he said, his voice carrying like a clear bell, "I didn't choose you despite anything. I chose you because of everything. Your strength, your kindness, your good sense, the way your heart finds good everywhere it looks. You make me want to be better. I will spend our days proving myself worthy of your love." Mrs. Patterson dabbed at her eyes. Mrs. Whitmore forgot to purse her mouth. The town exhaled like it had been holding its breath for months. The church basement became a stitched-together winter wonderland of ribbon and greenery. Maren moved through the congratulations with a grace she hadn't asked for, and now found she possessed. Mrs. Whitmore sidled up. "How did you catch such a man, Mrs. Carmichael?" "I didn't catch him," Maren said. "He caught me. I was myself. He saw the worth in that." Christmas Eve came with a soft fall of snow that made the world look as if it had been washed and wrung out and hung back up. On the porch of the house they had imagined together, Rowan loaded the sleigh for supper at Lila and Henry's. The house fit her like a well-sewn dress. The kitchen was wide and sun-caught with a window that looked out over where her garden would grow. The parlor had a stone fireplace and shelves ready for books. Their bedroom faced east to snag the first light. A small sewing room waited for winter afternoons. On their wedding night, he had lifted a lantern and led her out back. "Wasn't sure you'd approve," he said, sounding for once uncertain. He showed her the chicken coop, a small, sturdy glory with nesting boxes, a good run, windows for light. A wooden sign swung above the door. "Maren's Ladies." "You noticed," she whispered, thinking of every time she'd lingered near the Harris coop like it could tell her something about a life she wasn't living. "I notice everything about you," he said. "I fell in love watching you kneel on that porch, making beauty for others while they didn't know how to name you. Not out of pity, because I recognized home." 2 weeks later, wrapped in buffalo robes, Maren settled beside her husband. The horse's breath smoked in the cold. Sleigh bells made a small music that tugged at something childlike. She thought of the woman she had been 6 months back, resigned, half smaller than herself. That woman had slipped away like an old skin. This one knew her worth. Because someone steady had seen it, named it, and refused to let her forget it. Rowan squeezed her gloved hand. She leaned into his shoulder and let the world be exactly as it was, wide, bright, cold, and kind. Finally, completely, beautifully.